breaking news that just occurred, which is that President Trump put out a statement saying that we have a deal with China. I think this is probably good for everybody. Look, I think there's been obviously a lot of debate over how we have a relationship with China. But as I've said this entire time, the idea that we are going to be completely free of working with China is a bit absurd. And look, it's not to say that it's good. It's just the way things are right now. Sometimes you have to look at reality. You have to look at the reality of the situation. It's like people tell me, they're like, Logan, you should be against all war. And it's like, I am against all war. I wish there was no war. However, we live in a world where there is war. So we have to at least talk about it, because we have to be realistic. So Trump posts this on Truth Social just a few minutes ago. Our deal with China is done, subject to final approval with President Xi and me. Full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied upfront by China. Likewise, we will provide China what was agreed to, including Chinese students using our colleges and university, which has always been good with me. We are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China's getting 10%. Relationship is excellent. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Of course, that is in a signature all caps style President Trump post, again, on Truth Social. So again, announces will a done deal with China. And there are a lot more details. That's sort of the overarching.
Right.
But I think this is to settle down.
We haven't seen the full readout because it says, among other things we agreed to. Obviously, this comes out of the negotiating teams from China and the Trump administration in London. And they have negotiated this deal. And when he says the deal is done, meaning they have agreed to an agreement. They have come to an agreement. They know what each side is getting. The final sign-off is all that is left, and that would be by Xi Jinping in China and President Trump here in the United States. But I think it's also interesting, and we'll get into this as we go through, because the inflation numbers for May just came out. And this was something that, if you saw all the hysteria around the tariffs, that this was going to wreck our economy, that this was a disaster.
Armageddon.
It was all at Trump's doing. And what we've seen is that inflation actually rose less than they were projecting. It rose by 0.1%. 0.1%. So the year-over-year inflation right now is currently at 2.4%. The Fed's target rate, because the Fed, in the way our economy runs, is based off target inflation. They actually don't want inflation too low, because that is how our economy works with the central banking. So the target rate is 2%. It's only 0.4 above the target rate. And if you will call back to the previous administration, which had a peak inflation rate year over year of 9.1%, and you're drawing a contrast when people said this was going to be the end of the American economy, I think we can safely put that to rest, that the negotiations, the tariffs, at least up until this point, and if we get signatures on this deal, have seemed to have worked in favor of the American economy.
Yeah, I think there'll be a long-term impact. We'll have to see what it looks like. I'm curious when we have this conversation a year from now,
right,
what we're looking at here. And I think a lot of people are anticipating a President Trump move like this with many other countries. And what do those final tariffs kind of look like? You know, we're not in the days of the 200% tariffs and all that. Clearly, again, this was President Trump at the negotiating table. As we told you the whole time, by the way, CNN and Fox News, for that matter, are going to give you two very different points of view. And we're going to always tell you what the truth is. And the truth is, we can see it because we can tell what President Trump's playbook is, which is, it's in the book. It's in the art of the deal. You go big. You go big and you work your way to actually where you want. And that's clearly what's happened here with China. And including, by the way, look, some of you may think that's controversial, allowing the students in to do their work here, which is, he said, it's always been good with him.
The U.S. keeping 55% tariffs on Chinese goods, which is what, when we were raising our tariffs, people were saying we're going to spiral the inflation out of control. What you're actually seeing is that is still keeping the messaging and the plan of President Trump to want to bring manufacturing to the U.S. There's still that incentive to bring this back to America to avoid the manufacturing and situations when you're importing goods from China being slapped with a 55% tariff. Now, they also were able to negotiate down China's charged rate on American goods, which helps American businesses that want to export things to China because it raises the demand for the American goods in China. By having only the 10% tariff, that actually helps American manufacturers and American products that are sent over to China because the demand in China will rise for that. So that does seem to fit within even the entire goal of President Trump. By still us keeping a higher tariff on Chinese goods is to try to promote American businesses to compete with China. Yeah. But at the same time, China having a much lower tariff rate on the things we send there raises demand, helps pour money back into the U.S. economy.
When you start doing deals with China,
right?
Which again, I told you and I said, and I'm not saying I disagree with those deals because I think it's inevitable we have to work with China. I think America is not ready to live in a China less world. It would be virtually impossible, sadly. I'm not saying that's a good thing, by the way. That is just how we've built this country right now. We're all goods. Everything looking around this studio, 95% of the things in the studio were probably at least at some point touched by China, whether that was, the materials being used or whether it was the screens being made or the microphone in front of me. There is a pretty good chance that all of it had something somewhere, again, that China touched it. So we can't live in like a la-la land where we go, well, we're just going to cut them off. However, President Trump played big. He got a little innovative, tried something new, and it looks like it may pay off. And we are seeing moderate. Again, the market rose, you said, like a little bit. Like we haven't had a crazy response yet, but it just happened.
And it's also not it hasn't been signed yet.
You don't even know what it says.
When it's fully signed, I expect the world to rejoice that there is the end of this trade war with China. But to your point as well, Logan, and when people may be saying, like, I don't want to do anything with China at this point, that's a very noble goal. But the reality is, what would crash the economy totally? Globally is if you completely cut off China 100%, because every nation has become so beholden to them because of their humanitarian abuses. The reason they can produce these things for so much cheaper and everyone can enjoy it. So you can't just pull the plug on it. You have to do incremental steps to negotiate to put the United States in a much better economic position so that going down the road, we can strengthen ourselves. We can become more self-reliant. When you look at the CPI being at only 2.4%, just nominally above the target rate for the Fed, you look at the fact that energy and food, which is core CPI, only at 2.8%.
Consumer price index.
Yes, it's what they take as a basket of goods, and they see what the prices change month over month, and that's your inflation rate.
CPI. That's what I
But
heard.
when you look at all this, is that the truth is the tariff policy didn't destroy the economy like they said was going to happen. And in reality, what you're seeing is deals that can be made. And when we keep these tariffs at a higher rate on China and are able to continue to try to bring manufacturing back without disrupting the global economy in the short run, we were already doing this business with China. This isn't new business. This is trying to get us a better deal and a better path forward for the United States so that we can become less reliant on China.